We begin with accusations of racism and administrators allegedly ignoring them in the oldest public school in the country, Boston Latin. Last week on Martin Luther King Jr. Day, 2 Boston Latin students put out a YouTube video calling for others to raise awareness on social media about racism they say they've encountered at the school. Here's part of the video in which the students are giving examples of some suggested tweets and a warning. There's some language some may find offensive in this video.
Hashtag Black at BLS when you're the only black student in your AP US history course, and when slavery comes up, they all turn to you.
Hashtag Black at BLS when people can walk in the halls saying nigga without fear of being reprimanded.
Hashtag Black at BLS when your white peers are using Twitter and Facebook to put out racial slurs and negative things about students of color, and you print out the tweets and give them to your headmaster in a binder, and then she does nothing about it. Hashtag Black at BLS.
Joining me now are Tommy Chang. Tommy is the superintendent of the Boston Public Schools. Thank you for being here, superintendent. Okay. And Tito Jackson, chair of Boston City Council's Committee on Education, who's been actively involved in the issue. Good to see you, Counselor, as well.
Great to see you.
Do you believe these allegations by these students to be true, superintendent?
So I would say that this is a perception of students, and if they're feeling this, it is true.
The students say they gave a binder with some examples of this to the headmaster 16 months ago, and there was no response. Have you spoken to her about this?
Actually, I have.
And what is her response to that?
There was absolutely meetings last year where they had conversations. I think what
she with the students involved?
So, but I would say what is obvious is that more needed to have been done, and that's why the students felt the need to speak up again.
You've spoken to the students, Counselor Jack. How far back do these concerns about racism go?
I was their speaker last year at the MLK ceremony, which was in January, and I was asked to come back this year. I found out about this and from some of these tweets, as well as the back and forth at that point. In March of last year, I actually shared a letter with John McDonough, the interim superintendent.
His predecessor.
Yes, about these issues.
But I want to stay inside the school. We'll get to that prior superintendent for a second. You said about the school administration, they've not really taken these important issues to heart and done something about them. The superintendent says they did meet. Do you contend they didn't?
Meeting and doing something, as you know, being a former elected official,
yes, I was.
Is actually not necessarily the same thing. And I think we need to make the distinction. There were tweets that occurred last year in response to Ferguson that had racial epithets in them and that were bullying. MGL Chapter 71 and 7.5 in our book.
And what did the headmaster do about it?
Had a optional assembly. And spoke to some students. But the issue is this happened again this year, and more tweets were given to the headmaster, and the headmaster didn't do anything. And so I think that's the real underlying issue.
I want to quote from this March 2nd letter, if I may, that you sent to Interim Superintendent McDonough. The online conversation content included brutally hateful comments such as, but not limited to, I don't feel sorry for black people. If you hate us so much, go back to Africa. We should have never brought you. Did you get a response from the superintendent?
I did get a response.
What did he say to you?
I actually had a meeting with Lynn Moody Tata, and they laid out that they were going to do things, including put policies and procedures in place that would note that this wouldn't happen again. That didn't happen.
Were you aware when you took over? You've been in there only since July, I should say. A lot of this predates you, superintendent. Were you aware of this letter to your predecessor?
I actually was not aware of that letter.
So what are you doing now? So you say, if I can put words in your mouth, there was a meeting early on, but not enough was done. What's being done under your leadership now at that school?
So the first thing I did was I spoke to the headmaster to make sure that she had the support she needed, to make sure that she was immediately engaging the students. I will commend her. She had a meeting with the students last Friday. It was a successful meeting. The students actually tweeted out that they felt very supported by the school administration.
I read that. That is correct.
And then this morning, had a chance to meet with both students and the headmaster as well. The headmaster just sent out a letter to the Boston Latin School community saying that she met with the students and they're putting some concrete actions in place.
And that's all good. And if the students are content, then it's doubly good. But if this all started 16 months ago, and the most you get out of a headmaster with some, to use the city councilor's words, brutally racist tweets, is a meeting that led to not very much, How hopeful does that make you feel about whether or not this woman is the right person to be leading this revered institution?
So I would say that I am very hopeful that Lynn Mooney Tata will be able to lead this conversation at the school, but she will need support, and that's what our job is as the central office.
But aren't you troubled by what she didn't do in the year plus, other than have this meeting? I don't mean the current one, I mean the old one. Doesn't that trouble you?
I would say these sort of conversations are conversations about issues that have existed for decades, if not for hundreds of years. This is the oldest school in the country. So to put everything on this headmaster, I don't think is fair.
Do you agree with that?
No, I don't agree with it at all, because I believe that it is our job as adults to step forward and actually do something when things like this happen. In addition, it's the law. And in addition, what I would like to see is the Office of Equity at the Boston Public Schools actually step forward and do an investigation here. I would like to see the appointment of an external counsel to actually look at what has gone on here. Because
at this school or citywide? Michael Curry, head of the city's NAACP, has said he'd like to see an external, citywide, school-wide.
And I think this is where we both agree, and we've had several conversations about this. This is a teachable moment and an opportunity as a city for us to actually be leaders, to step up and deal with these age-old, decade-old issues that have been happening in the city of Boston.
Are you happy with his response so far?
I am happy with his response. He's called me about 50 times to date. But I think he has to ensure the accountability and safety, and to ensure also that there's no retribution for these students, as well as any adult who's helped them.
Boston Latin, less than 9% black, citywide, roughly 35%. Do you have any reason to believe that these problems don't exist in other of the Boston City schools?
I would be surprised if these sort of issues are only isolated at Boston Latin School. That is why, as Councilor Jackson said, there needs to be a citywide conversation about such issues.
How do you feel about this external thing that I think you and I know that Michael Curry are suggesting, independent, outside the school, looking into the school system on this issue?
So I would ask that we be, the school committee and the school department be given the time to actually deeply analyze this issue. We have new leadership in terms of our equity, in our equity office, and we also have new leadership in our achievement gap office.
So are you saying no or just not yet?
Not yet. We will determine that.
Fair enough. Superintendent, thank you so much for your time.
Councilor,
Counselor,
so much.
Thank you as well.